Peace, everyone, and welcome to FavorFlowRestorative, where harmony is unleashed, mind, body, and soul. Today, I want to come on and talk about energy in motion, which is about our emotions. A lot of this channel speaks about emotions. And when we think about our emotions, when we think about our physical health, when we think about our mental health, when we think about our emotional health, even when we think about our sexual health, how are these things influenced? So I can only speak from my own experiences. But the key for me has always been to go back to the inner child. Go back to the seed of creation, of your incarnation here. What were the things that you experienced? Our families are our first community. Our parents are our first introduction to building relationships, building friendships, knowing how to cultivate love. And whether or not we experience these in a healthy way or not, or whether we experienced these things in a space of distortion, really tends to drive our reality and our future experiences with them. And so no matter how old you are, if there is some type of conflict in your life, in whatever aspect that shows up, because no one is living here on earth without some sort of conflict, you would cease to need to continue to live here on earth, because earth is here for us to heal. So looking at your soul story, where does it lie? Because if we think about the emotions that we have a feeling about the conflict. And so however we feel about it is definitely our truth. But where is the energy in motion? Where does it reside? And so in this moment, as we have this conversation, I invite you to take a deep breath. And as you exhale, allow yourself to do a body scan. And with this body scan, be a distant observer of where tension, tightness, or pain may reside in the body. And if you happen to feel pain, tension, or tightness in the body, I invite you in the next few breaths to send loving and healing energy through the power of the breath to those spaces. And as you're sending this loving, healing energy to those spaces, give them a voice. Listen to them. Because in those spaces lies a dis-ease, a conflict, an insecurity, a fear. It manifests in different ways for all of us. And think back to the first time you felt that emotion. When was the first time you felt that you weren't good enough? What was the first situation that made you feel insecure or unstable or unworthy or angry or misunderstood, betrayed, misled. And as you're doing the breath work on yourself and listening to your body, I'm going to proceed to tell you a story about a little girl that I know. Once upon a time, there was a little girl. And this little girl incarnated with all of the knowledge that she needed to serve her soul's purpose on this earth. She was so excited to be here. There was so much that she knew already before her incarnation because of the previous ones before it. The first relationships that she had, of course, were with her family. And with the members of this family, she was able to discover love, affection, and belongingness. The shadow side to the love, affection, and belongingness was obedience. And many times she found that the obedience, the transactional relationship of obedience for love, care, and affection began to slowly chip away at her soul's purpose in the manner of self-worth, in the manner of fear of instability, the fear of being misunderstood and not accepted, the fear of not being good enough, and the biggest fear of, as she moved away from how she incarnated, being able to see the path of her soul's purpose begin to disappear. Many of us, as we grow in age, find that the manifestations of our first relationships begin to manifest within the communities that we live in, whether it be our career community, our community that we evolve in as we go to school, the relationships that we engage in, whether they be friends or partners or marriage, the relationships that we have with our children, the way that we choose to rear our children, our whole foundation and our belief system are built on the foundation of these first relationships. If you found that these first relationships exposed you to emotional abuse, that the transaction of love was based on your emotions, either being gaslighted, not heard, not understood, or simply not taken into consideration. How now does that manifest in the life that you lead right now? In the way that you show up in spaces and in the way that you show up for yourself. If you look back to your inner child's journey and you find that you were violated sexually, how does that manifest in the relationships that you have now, whether they be friends, family, partnership, marriage, or even in the sexual health that you engage in, the activities, the fetishes, what you're into now, and the way that you express yourself? As we think about our physical health and the transaction of love, affection, and belongingness, of whether I finished all of my food, are we battling with obesity from a space of shame and guilt or embarrassment? Our physical health, anxiety. How does the release or non-release of cortisol or the stimulation of the vagus nerve, how does that influence how we are able to respond? Whether it be to respond to beautiful things that happen, beautiful experiences that happen within our journey, or ones that create conflict within ourselves or with others. Are any of the physical spaces that you tuned into with your body scan, are they related to this first relationship? Because indeed these experiences lead to us as we look at who we are in the relationship that we have with ourselves, and that internal subconscious programming now relates outside of us in our external exchanges and transactions and relationships, even our preferences. Whether we prefer one political party or one religion over another, or one specific race or way of being or doing or class system over another. Why? Why have an opinion of any of it? Recognizing that we have an opinion because it is something that is brought to our attention to be able to have the resolve that it is so desperate for. It wants resolution. It comes to the surface. It comes to our thoughts. It comes to our minds. It shows up in our emotions. It shows up in our feelings. It shows up in our bodies. It shows up in our relationships. It shows up in our presence. It shows up in our preferences. It shows up in what we invest our time and energy and resources into. It shows up whether we want it to or not. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. It shows up in the most devastating way that it shows up, that continues to perpetuate, is when we lack prioritizing the healing necessary or prioritize even thinking that there needs to be healing in order to be able to restore those parts, those compartments, those fragments of ourselves, so that we don't make the mistake of passing it on to future generations to perpetuate something that had the potential to end with you and your incarnation here. Why? When looked at through that perspective, it seems like such a selfish act to think that healing is unnecessary if a conflict actually does exist. Because now we know through our body scan that a conflict can exist in several different ways. If you're in the best health, how is your mental? If your mental is well, how are your emotions? How are you feeling? If your emotions are well, how are your relationships? We are all physical beings in different incarnations of who our source is, here to have these experiences, to ultimately, as we heal ourselves and are interconnected in this web, we heal the world, not one person at a time, but one breath at a time. Because as we exhale, we water the earth. And depending on what you're exhaling, waters the earth. And we are living in a world where we see the effects of toxicity of the water. Because really, if you think of the percentage and the composition of water within our bodies, the toxicity impacts the earth just as the purification does. So then the conflict rests in us as a choice. With every breath, what choice do you make? And what intent is behind the choice that you're making? We know that we're interconnected, and so those of us who have the gift of gab, that have the gift of connectivity and networking, how are you using your gifts? Are you using them to play on the heartstrings of others with your gift? Because gifts can be physical, they can be mental, they can be spiritual. And because we are all interconnected, we want to foster trust, but trust that lacks within creates untrustworthiness, lack of integrity amongst the whole, because we're refusing to heal what's within that allows us not to trust ourselves, and it perpetuates outside of ourselves, influencing and impacting others that we are connected to, who are then connected to others. It is a spider web of deceit. What we experience isn't outside of ourselves, it's within. We have the power to live and experience that we create. We are the creators of our experience. And so projecting what you create as your experience onto others, it's disrespectful. It is not loving. It is not the loving choice. It does not create harmony. It does not create peace. And for whatever you feel about the circumstances outside of yourself, even if they're warranted your truth, there is a way in unconditional love to respond to everything. And as the saying goes, if you cannot help them, at least don't hurt them. If there is something that needs to be said, if there is not a way, because we live within universal law. And even if we don't say it, the universe hears. The universe sees. There is an omnipotence that resides within this web that we were interconnected with. And as it is experiencing it, there is a law within it that has a response that is so perfect, and it supersedes anything that we put into it because it has to. It is what keeps our existence in divine order. And so if you choose not to look at these aspects, not to be self-aware, not to be conscious, then know that whether you choose that, it is still a choice that you've made to ignore. And the universe will respond accordingly. And there will no longer be this interconnectedness where whatever you put out will not come back. It will always come back. You get what you give. And so I invite and I encourage anyone under the sound of my voice to use this time to foster the inner child, to go through the process of creating allies with shadows, with conflicts, with whatever is not feeling good within you. It is no longer okay to wear the mask. Mask off. We're out of that. That's old news. All masks are off. Everything has now been exposed. What are you going to do with it?